Betsy Faria had incurable cancer, but had no intention of dying suddenly and prematurely. However, she was found lifeless in her own home. A knife was in her neck, but it was not a case of suicide by a desperate woman. She was covered with knife wounds, as if pierced like a sieve 55, according to the police who responded to the 911 call. They arrived within 10 minutes and deduced that Betsy had been dead for at least an hour or more. What happened on December 27, 2011 in Troy, Missouri? Who was responsible for the terrible act against Betsy Faria using a steak knife? Her husband, Russell Faria, found her and was pegged as the main suspect despite having an alibi. Was he suspected simply because he was quick-tempered, or because his wife's illness was a burden? He was the only man close to the victim, fueling the assumption that only a man could commit such a crime. Neither the daughters of his murdered wife nor her best friend defended him. They didn't doubt his guilt. Without evidence but no other suspects, Russ was the prime candidate in a case built entirely on circumstantial evidence. In the mugshot, we see Russ Faria's embarrassed and offended face. This guy wants to understand why fate is unfair to him. Perhaps he experiences pangs of conscience for what he has done and even repents. A murderer caught in the act is not uncommon. Subsequent events showed that Russ did not repent. These eyes on the mugshot captured his mistrust of justice and his lack of hope of receiving it. Russ never admitted his guilt, although the logic of circumstances grabbed him by the throat. In the photograph, we see a strong man and a true American who knows his rights and wants to defend them. But even a real American is capable of killing out of revenge or in a fit of rage. There's a lot in Russell Faria's case that needs to be cleared up. He never lost hope of being freed. After being tried twice, he was finally acquitted. He was determined to clear his name. Betsy's story is compelling enough to be known by millions, and it indeed became widely recognized after the release of the true crime comedy drama, The Thing About Pam. This show brought widespread attention to the intricacies and twists of the case. As you can see, the miniseries title does not appeal to the main suspect. It's about the murdered woman's best friend. The investigation knows that this woman helped the victim overcome the pain and loneliness of the last days of her life. She was the last person to see Betsy alive. Pam actively cooperates with the investigation, helping to expose Russ Faria. She can tell you a lot. She knew how to lead her readers by the nose. Each Agatha Christie detective story was different from the other. However, even a talented writer needs help determining how life can come up. Agatha Christie would be interested in this case and would write a great story. In Betsy Faria's case, neither the brilliant Hercule Poirot nor the meticulous Miss Marple would get to the bottom of the truth. The discovery of the crime took place not months but years. The legal saga continues today, and it is unknown when it will end. Who benefited from killing Betsy Faria, a wife and mother slowly dying from breast and liver cancer? The investigator learned that she was insured for a large amount. After her death, the money went to her husband, her daughters, and Pam Hupp. So Russ Faria was interested in helping his ailing wife get to her grave. In addition, the circumstances of the case pointed precisely to him. The murder was committed with particular cruelty. That's not all. The killer had to have unhindered access to the victim's apartment and know the location of the rooms. The puzzle was coming together. One more fact could not be attached to Betsy Faria's husband or anyone else. This is the number of stab wounds. Why was it 55? One blow deep to the throat was enough to kill the woman. Surely, the investigator asked this question, but the version of ritual murder was not developed. Why create unnecessary entities if everything is already clear? Russ was taken into custody and convicted of the brutal murder of his wife, but the story of this crime is just beginning. The best friend gradually comes to the fore. Pam Hupp seems to be the most knowledgeable about the processes that took place in this family. Betsy trusted her with her secrets and sought support during attacks of fear and loneliness. In court, Pam did not consider it necessary to hide the fact that the dying woman was afraid of her cruel husband and was going to leave him. Russ denied all this because he was determined not to admit his guilt. Pam Hupp selflessly helped her friend. With all her behavior, she seemed to blame Russ for neglecting his sick wife. Pamela herself has been constantly with her friend since they met in 2010, a year before Betsy's murder. Where were the daughters of the murdered woman at that time? They remembered their mother only when the time came to receive insurance benefits. The death of the insurance owner was beneficial not only to Russ Faria, but also to Betsy's daughters. Throughout this story, they showed themselves to be quite greedy girls. Pamela does not suspect Betsy's daughters of anything. The police and investigators believe her to be a close friend of the murdered woman. According to Pam, their relationship was more than a simple friendship. However, Betsy could no longer confirm or deny this information. If Miss Marple had been in charge of this case, she would have noticed that representatives of the judicial system are influenced by public opinion. Often, sentences are handed down how the public wants them to be. In the United States, where this murder took place, the crimes are always the subject of much discussion. Indirectly, ordinary people influence the investigation, and you must have great courage to go against the crowd. This is what happened with the Betsy Faria case. The public identified the culprit of the crime. It was, or should have been, Russ Faria. Without direct evidence, investigators and prosecutors agreed to this. But Russ Faria and his lawyer disagreed. They continued to fight. Of course, it was revenge the prosecutors and ordinary people fought, because Russ Faria killed his wife because of insurance benefits. While the alleged killer sat on his bunk, his wife's daughters began a new lawsuit. They are unhappy that their mother's friend received such money. It was like a dance on a grave, since neither side wanted to give up the money they considered theirs. The daughters lost the case and even had to pay the opposing attorney's fees. The caring friend continued to receive income from the money bequeathed to her by Betsy Faria for a few days after the latter's death. A right to benefit was not questioned. Pam Hupp eased her friend's suffering until the last moment. The public and the court system concluded that she was entitled to this money. But why did no one pay due attention to the fact that this woman was the last person to see poor Betsy alive? Events after the redistribution of insurance benefits developed rapidly. 5 days later, Betsy underwent chemotherapy at the Alvin J. Siteman Cancer Center. The patient felt well, so she decided to visit her mother. Pam didn't leave her side. She almost demanded to take her friend home instead of Russ as planned. It was as if she suspected something and did not want to leave Betsy with her husband. That's how she explained her behavior in the courtroom. Her emotional speech played a decisive role in the sentencing of Betsy's husband. Hupp claimed that she drove Betsy home at approximately 7 p.m. At 7:21 p.m., one of her daughters called her mother, but the call went unanswered. Russ was the first to discover his wife's body. He called 911. The police arrived 10 minutes after the call. The investigators' first suspicion was that Russ called the murder a suicide, even though it was clear at first glance that it was not. The man explained that he was mistaken because he was stunned by what he saw. Of course, he admitted the possibility of his wife's suicide since she spoke about it more than once. However, he was cool enough to pick up the phone and dial the emergency number. Russ's thoughts and actions are understandable. If a man expects his wife to commit suicide, her corpse immediately suggests that she only carried out her plan. He could not even imagine that what had happened was not suicide but murder. But it was a murder carried out most brutally. Russ Faria's misjudgment of the event is understandable. The arriving police were no less shocked than he was. Betsy's body was mangled. The victim was lying on his right side. The wrists were cut to the bone, and a jagged kitchen knife was in the throat. Soon, the police discovered a second knife. He was lying under the sofa, but the police did not find a single drop of blood in the toilet and other places. Russ was the only witness and the only suspect. He said he spent the evening at his friend Michael Corbin's house watching movies from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., then drove to Arby's in Lake Street, Lewis. His friend confirmed these words. It seemed strange that Russ was not hurrying to go home to his sick and lonely wife. Perhaps for this reason, neither Palm nor his wife's daughters defended the man. Possibly, her daughters would have acted differently if they had also been his children. They seemed quite happy with Russ' conviction. Ultimately, they were above suspicion and could now begin to divide the inheritance. Russ looked like a lone wolf, backed into a corner. This is how he looks in the mugshot taken after his arrest. Pam Hupp contributed to the conviction of Russ Faria. Her testimony served as the basis for his arrest after Betsy's funeral. According to Pam, Russ was a violent man who drank heavily and threatened his wife. Also, from her words, Betsy was afraid of her husband and was thinking about leaving him. His agitated emotional state during interrogation was considered suspicious by police, and he allegedly failed a polygraph test. At Pam's direction, law enforcement searched Betsy's laptop and found a Word document in which she allegedly expressed fears that her husband would kill her. Russ was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He was allowed to post bail for $250,000, but the defendant did not have that money. He was held in the county jail until his trial on November 18, 2013. Pam Hupp looked like a model small-town Missourian. She was born on October 10, 1958. There was nothing remarkable about her childhood in Delwood nor her school life in Riverview Gardens. Pamela decided to work in the insurance industry, and alarm bells were starting to ring. She was fired twice for forging signatures. We do not know whether this fact alerted the investigators leading the Betsy Faria murder case. However, a minor violation of the law is not at all a reason to suspect a brutal murder. As a rule, a maniac does not fall into the hands of the police due to trifles. In 2001, Pam began working as an administrator at State Farm, Missouri, where she flipped houses. Since she resigned and tried to apply for disability benefits, Mrs. Hupp has not been very healthy. She complains of pain in her back, legs, and neck. The woman is married and apparently happy. Pam Hupp met Betsy in 2010 at State Farm Insurance. However, their relationship went further than that of the insurance agent and client. They were united by compassion for a certain family that almost went bankrupt due to cancer treatment. Betsy was not impoverished and even insured her life for a tidy son. But she had no hopes for her recovery and talked about suicide. She found a reliable friend and patient interlocutor in her new acquaintance. While the husband was at work, the two women spent much time together. What were they doing? We can only learn about this from Pam Hupp's words. We will no longer be able to ask Betsy Faria what prompted her to make Pamela Hupp the main beneficiary of her insurance. Considering the charity project of these two women, the reason for the redistribution of insurance benefits may have been to care for a needy family. Perhaps Pam promised her dying friend that she would donate the proceeds to a good cause. Mrs. Hupp claimed that she dissuaded her from such a decision. Betsy's daughters and her husband didn't know about the change in her will before the trial, but the prosecutors thought Russ found out and killed his wife, either because he was angry or wanted revenge. Betsy's daughters said during interrogation that Pam was physically unable to inflict so many stab wounds. Is this woman capable of cunning murder? While Russ and his lawyer filed appeals and fought for justice, crowds gathered around Pam Hupp. In 2013, her mother, Shirley Newman, fell from a balcony to her death. The old lady was insured, and Pam Hupp received the insurance payout a second time. Shirley Mae Newman, a widow since 2000, lived alone in a third-floor apartment at the Lakeview Park Independent Retirement Community in Fenton. She had dementia and arthritis. The housekeeper found the older woman dead under the balcony of her house at 14:30. The day before, Pam Hupp had driven her mother home from the hospital. A police investigation determined that the aluminum balcony railings were broken. It is unlikely that an older woman who has dementia and arthritis could do this. The autopsy further showed that the deceased had a dose of the sedative zolpidem in her blood, which was 8 times the normal dose. Could Shirley Newman mistakenly take more pills than she should? Theoretically, yes, but she was the mother of Pam Hupp, who was already involved in the strange death. 2 episodes may be coincidences, but the third points to a pattern. Pam Hupp got away with her mother's death, as did Betsy Faria. However, in 2016, there was another death in which Pam was directly involved. This is about the murder of Louis Royce Gumpenberger, a Missouri resident. This 33-year-old guy had mental and physical disabilities after the plane crash. Pam Hupp pumped 5 bullets into him in the hallway of her home at 1260 Little Brave Drive in O'Fallon, allegedly in self-defense. On the body of the murdered man, detailed instructions were found on how he should kill and violate the body of Pam Hupp. It explicitly stated that its author was Russ Faria, who had already been acquitted and released by then. At the police headquarters, where she volunteered, Pam Hupp told a gripping story about how Gumpenberger attacked her while brandishing a knife. She described how she used a karate chop to knock out the knife and then ran into the house firing back with a Ruger LCR. Thus, what appeared before the public eye was no longer a weak woman, but almost an FBI agent. This time, the police were not so naive. The district attorney and the police chief put forward their version. According to it, Hupp lured Gumpenberger to her home by posing as a Dateline NBC television program producer. She shot the unsuspecting man in cold blood and then planted a knife and a note on him. This time, the investigation used cell phone records, which showed that Hupp had been near Gumpenberger's home an hour before his attack. This means that she could well have known him. Soon, a witness came forward who claimed that a lady resembling Pamela Hupp approached her with an offer to reenact the 911 call. Then, another witness showed up with the same story. Hupp was looking for someone who would become a participant in her cunning scheme, which would make Russ Faria the perpetrator of the attempt on her own life. Louis Gumpenberger was chosen by chance, and only because he had a mental illness and did not understand well what was happening. The police got the bit between their teeth and began to unravel the tangle of crimes. First, the Gumpenberger case, then the Shirley Newman case, and then the murder of Betsy Faria. Investigators found a lot of evidence incriminating Pamela Hupp in the premeditated murder of Louis Gumpenberger. After Hupp was charged in the death of the unfortunate and gullible guy, the St. Louis County Police Department reopened the investigation into the Shirley Newman case. There weren't many clues here, but there were some. One of the vertical bars was probably knocked out before the older woman's body fell from the balcony. Unfortunately, this was circumstantial evidence. The Shirley Newman case was closed, and the charges against Pam Hupp were dropped. Hupp entered an Alfred plea to the murder of Louis Gumpenberger in June 2019. An Alfred plea is a guilty plea in which the defendant does not admit to committing the crime, but agrees that the prosecution has enough evidence to obtain a conviction. This type of plea allows the defendant to plead guilty but maintain their innocence in the eyes of the law. The Louis Gumpenberger case led to the reopening of the investigation into the murder of Betsy Faria by Lincoln County District Attorney Mike Wood. 2019 went down in world history as the year of the COVID-19 pandemic. It slowed down the investigation into Betsy Faria's murder, but it didn't stop it. By the summer of 2021, Attorney Wood clearly explained what happened on December 27, 2011, in Troy, Missouri. It was a heinous and immoral crime. Court documents filed by Wood alleged that Hupp ingratiated herself with Betsy and then killed her for money. Taking advantage of the woman's weakness after chemotherapy, Pan attacked her with a knife and stabbed her multiple times. Betsy's husband and her daughters didn't know that Pan had received more than each of them. Pamela's payments amounted to $150,000, and the father and daughters $100,000 each. The Lincoln County District Attorney also said he would investigate possible prosecutorial misconduct during the initial murder investigation. He added that it was mishandled from the start and was driven by confirmation bias against Betsy Faria's husband. Prosecutor Mike Wood exposed not only a treacherous killer, he exposed the negligent and brutal actions of the relevant investigators and prosecutors. But the district attorney's bold speech failed to provide impetus. Hupp pleaded not guilty, and in September 2021, the armed criminal action charge against her was dropped. The preliminary hearing was postponed indefinitely due to the death of the public defender from a heart attack. The long journey of the Betsy Faria case through cities and counties began. In February 2024, Mike Wood announced his intention to apply the death penalty due to the established aggravating circumstances. It is that the murder being investigated is vile, heinous, or inhumane because it involves depravity of the mind. Most of us are captured by stereotypes. It seems to us that only a big and strong man can commit a brutal crime. Women are more likely to kill with someone else's hands or with poison, but some can still be quite ferocious. Pam Hupp fooled everyone with her fragility and caring for her friend. She told a sub-story about the love of two women, but no one wanted to see her financial gain. Society yearned to see Russ Faria as the killer because he drank beer and watched a movie with a friend instead of sitting next to his sick wife. People were ready to believe the caring Pamela Hupp. Investigators and prosecutors did not dare to go against public opinion, so they allowed gross negligence and even calculated criminal behavior. Stereotypes should not obscure the truth, since only the truth is the basis of a just society.